Today's video is all about criminal profiling. So criminal profilers study evidence collected and analyzed by crime scene investigators. So criminal profilers are not crime scene investigators, nor are they typically responsible for the collection of evidence. That is happening with the crime scene investigators we've been learning about all semester together. However, crime scene investigators will show their evidence to criminal profilers, and the criminal profilers will use that evidence to formulate a hypothesis about the perpetrator's approximate age, some features of their personality, features of their lifestyle, and the kind of social environment they maintain. So Cesar Labrusso wrote The Criminal Man in 1876. This is kind of considered to be the beginning of the field of criminal profiling. And his book suggested that criminals shared certain characteristics in common. The characteristics he mentioned can be seen on your screen. And essentially, all of them are physical characteristics. So he said the physical characteristics could be used to determine whether someone would become a criminal or not. Science has since thoroughly disproved that physical attributes can predict behavior. And in many cases, the association with thinking physical characteristics can be associated with behavior is largely rooted in racism. So we no longer consider that to be accurate. Hans Gross, who we've talked about multiple times, wrote his Criminal Investigation, a practical textbook for magistrates, police officers, and lawyers in 1906. He did not talk much about criminal profiling, but he essentially used science and wanted people to be systematic. And this is more the approach we take to criminal profiling today. Gerald Fosbrook wrote Character Reading Through the Analysis of Features in 1914. Very similar to Labrusso, we have similarly disproved that we can use physical features to figure out criminality. Eric Wolfen wrote Woman as a Sexual Criminal. He essentially suggested that women did not normally commit crimes, and if they did, it was for a sexual reason, that women could not commit crimes for any other reason. This has also since been shown to be false. John O'Connell and Harry Soderman wrote Modern Criminal Investigations in the 1930s, which, although not completely accurate, did have some good stuff in it. Similarly, Paul Kirk wrote Criminal Investigation in 1953, also containing some good information. With that kind of history, modern-day profiling has developed and is different than its historical roots. One of the big players in the field of criminal profiling are forensic psychiatrists. Now, not all forensic psychiatrists are criminal profilers, but a lot of them do become them. So, forensic psychiatrists can interview criminals and suspects. Although police and detectives can do this, sometimes forensic psychiatrists are called in because they can give a different perspective. They can be asked to evaluate the personal history of a suspect. They can administer personality tests to see if someone has a personality disorder, and they can present an opinion as testimony in court. So they are considered expert witnesses in most cases and can testify in court, either for the prosecution or the defense. Modern-day criminal profiling really came about with James Brussel in the 1950s, who viewed profiling as a diagnostic tool, which was really going to bridge criminal investigations and forensic psychiatrists. So forensic psychiatrists existed before this. Criminal profiling was sort of the next step of how we could use forensic psychiatry to help criminal investigators. This led to Howard Tetton creating the Criminal Profiling Division in 1970 for the FBI, and eventually Jack Kirsch, an FBI agent, opening the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, the BSU. The BSU is now directed by the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crimes, and you can see their logo right there. So there are 6 stages to the criminal profiling process, and they do go in order. They are input, decision process models, crime assessment, criminal profile, investigation, and apprehension. Hopefully you make it through all 6 stages, but these are the stages. So up first we have input. Now there's a lot that can go into the input. These are just some examples. For example, collecting evidence. Now, all of the evidence would have already been collected, so this is really more looking at the evidence, the placement of the victim and the weapon, the body position, blood spatter, the condition of the surroundings, all that sort of stuff. What was the evidence at that crime scene and where was it all located? They're also going to look into the history of the victim, things like employment, reputation, social habits, hobbies, interests, and if someone dead is involved, they will look at the autopsy report to get a conclusive idea of how that individual died and what happened to them before, during, and after their death. From there, they're going to move to stage 2, which is the decision process models. The first step of the decision process models is to classify the crime. Now, there are a lot of different crimes, but most often criminal profilers are called in for murder cases. So we are going to look at the classifications of murders. So a single homicide has one victim at one location, one event, cooling off period does not apply. Similarly, a double homicide is 2 victims, but still only one location, one event, without any cooling off period needing to apply. Triple homicide, same deal, except now as triple implies, we have 3, but still one location, still one event, and cooling off period still does not apply. Now, mass murder is 4 or more victims at one location, one event, and still the cooling off period does not apply. So anytime we get over 3, we just call it mass murder. Now, this is different than a killing spree, which is only 2 or more people at 2 or more locations, but it's all part of one event, and there is no cooling off period between killings because they are happening one right after another. There was a case not too long ago of an Uber driver who picked up a ride, was driving around, and started shooting people out his window. That would be a spree killing, all part of the same car ride. Then we have serial murders, which most definitions put it at 3 or more. You will sometimes see it as 2 or more. For our purposes, we're going to use 3 or more victims at 3 or more locations as 3 or more events. So these are essentially 3 single homicides, but they are all the work of the same person. So we begin to classify them as a serial murder. Now, these do have a cooling off period, and it varies from serial killer to serial killer. Some have a cooling off period of days, some have weeks, some have months, some even go out years in between killings. And sometimes that it can change as they continue to kill. After classifying the crime, they're going to look at determining what the motives might be for these crimes. They're also going to assess the risk level of the victim. Now, I know this can sound like victim blaming, but we need to know what kind of situation the victim was in and how likely they are to become a victim of a crime, because that's going to be important. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So a victim is a person who has experienced harm, injuries, loss, or death. Therefore, victimology is the study of victims, as the name implies, who have been affected by crimes, accidents, or natural disasters. So victimology is for much more than just serial killers, but it often comes into play. So the assessment of victim risk is very subjective. What one person may consider a risky behavior, someone else may not. So it is a very subjective analysis. So a low-risk victim leads a lifestyle and social environment of the individual does not predispose him or her to being the victim of a crime. So these are people with regular jobs, regular families, they have routines. When they travel with their husband, wife, kids, whatever. They are living just kind of a normal life. They are typically at least middle class, if not upper middle class or more, kind of meaning they aren't in situations where crimes are occurring frequently. Now, why is it important to establish that someone is a low-risk victim? The reason is that a low-risk victim is most likely to know the person who attacked them, because they only really come in contact with people that they know. So they are likely to have been attacked by someone they know. Meanwhile, a medium risk victim has the lifestyle and social environment of an individual that can increase his or her risk of being the victim of a crime. Now, this may still be someone who seems to have a regular life, a regular family, but maybe they are on the lower income side, meaning that they do come in contact with issues involving crime more often. Or maybe they have a job that's a little bit on the risky side, but everything else about their life is normal. So medium risk is kind of the most difficult. They may know the person who committed the crime against them, they may not. Now, this is compared to a high-risk victim, which is a lifestyle and social environment of an individual often puts him or her at risk of becoming the victim of a crime. These are typically people who are practicing illegal careers, such as drug dealing or sex work, or anything that's going to put them in contact with crime on a very regular basis. Now, these individuals are most likely to be attacked by someone they do not know. So by establishing that they are a high-risk victim, we know that it's likely not someone in their regular life, that it's someone else who likely attacked them. So by establishing the victim risk, it is very important in us getting together a list of potential suspects. So some factors that we are going to consider when looking at the victim risk is their age, job, and criminal background, because depending on what age they are, certain behaviors may be considered risky, may not. Depending on what their job is, some behaviors may be considered risky, some may not. Depending on their criminal background, we may consider some things riskier than others. Other characteristics that we look at are their aggressive nature. Are they the kind of person to get in a fight? Are they the kind of person to run away from a fight? Are they impulsive? Are they impulsive? Are they the kind of person who would see a great deal on a plane ticket to Mexico and just get on a plane without a hotel or anybody going with them? Or are they the kind of person who really carefully plans things? Are they more passive, meaning that they wouldn't stand up for themselves if they got themselves in a dangerous situation? Or are they the kind of person who would really advocate for themselves? Do they thrive on attention? Sometimes people who thrive on attention put themselves in risky situations in order to get the attention that they want. Do they have a poor self-image? People with poor self-image are actually more likely to be victims of crimes than people who have a positive self-image. So the next time you're down about yourself, have a more positive self-image. Are they a negative person? Do they exhibit addictive behaviors? People who exhibit addictive behaviors, even if we aren't talking about drugs or alcohol, shopping addiction, for example, are more likely to become victims of crime. So we consider a lot of different factors. So then we move to the crime assessment. This is the motivation behind. These can include things like the motivation behind the crime. Is it premeditated and planned? Is it impulsive or no plan? These are two very different people who would have committed a crime. Someone who premeditates and plans is a very different kind of person than someone who's impulsive with no plan. So figuring that out. Also identifying the modus operandi, which is the method of operation, often called the MO. So this is essentially how this person commits their crimes. What steps are there in their process? Because especially when we're talking about serial cases, we begin to see a repeating MO. This is different than a signature, which is a repeating habit at each crime scene. This isn't necessarily saying they always do follow the same process when committing their crime. The signature is usually something that is either taken, left behind. It's usually something small. For example, there was a killer called the Smiley Face Killer who literally drew a smiley face in his victim's blood. That was his signature. While it was part of the committing of the crime, it was really an unnecessary element of the crime that he included anyway. The signature can also be a little habit, like always taking the necklace off a victim or something. This brings us to our criminal profile. So at this stage, after analyzing all the information, a criminal profiler would be ready to present the criminal profiler to the detective or whatever unit is working on the case. A typical profiler is going to include estimates of race, sex, physical characteristics, habits, and values and beliefs. You know, it might be surprising that they could figure out all of these things, but many profilers have successfully predicted these things in the past. Are they always correct? No. But have they correctly predicted these things? Definitely. The profiler is going to be compared to the decision process models and reconstruction of the crime scene to make sure that that profile fits in with every piece of evidence they have. Now from there, the investigation is kind of going to begin anew with the profiler submitting their report. And then this is typically where the detectives take back over, seeking and evaluating suspects that might match that profile. If they don't have any suspects that might match that profile, that means they're going to start looking for new suspects that do match that profile. And then the hopeful last stage of this process is apprehension, where they are going to apprehend some suspect and interview them, or arrest some subject and interrogate them. What is the difference between these? Technically, apprehend and interview, that person is free to leave at any time. They have likely been asked to voluntarily come in, and they are being talked to, usually without a lawyer present, because they're free at any time to say, I'm done, I don't want to be here anymore, and they can walk out that door. Now, this is usually the case when they don't currently have enough evidence to arrest someone and are hoping they'll come in and say something that allows them to arrest them. This is different than if they already have enough evidence or the person has said something that they shouldn't have, where they can do the arrest, read the Miranda rights, and then that moves into an interrogation where if the person says they don't want to talk, they basically get sent to a holding cell and wait for a lawyer. And the case begins to go through the legal system. So that is the difference there. And this is hopefully the end, which will ultimately result in some sort of ruling that puts the bad guy in jail. We're going to do a lot more with criminal profiling, so I hope you're ready.